Begin the current Daf Pesachim Daf Tzaddik Ches. We begin on the bottom of Tzaddik Zayin base, 3 lines off from the bottom of the Yomim. We continue with the next Mishnah. Again, continuing on the theme of the previous Mishnah regarding when you change something about the Korban Pesach, you don't do it the way it's supposed to. You're on the halacha of Yirat Sheistayim, then it graze until it develops a blemish, and you don't bring it as a Korban itself. It is caused by Kazak and Chesku to enter in the Rachayim. Hashem is joining us in today's Daf. Mishum is Alman Aliyah. So what we're going to discuss in today's Daf are, if somebody designates as a Pesach, a female, which is not valid, it has to be a male, or a 2-year-old, it's not valid, it has to be a year-old, animal for a Korban Pesach, what is the halacha regarding that Korban? Additionally, what to do with a Korban Pesach of a man who died, which is also a problem regarding his son. Could the son bring it as a Korban Pesach, as a Korban Shalom? What should you do with it? Next mission to discuss regarding Korban Pesach that gets mixed with other Korbanos. What do? You don't know which is the Pesach, which are the other animals, and it depends what it gets mixed with. Then the next Mishnah discusses various permutations, different cases of a lost Korban Pesach. If it got lost and then they sent someone else to go find it, and he said, okay, in case I don't find it, in case you do find it, I'll be on your Korban, you'll be on my Korban. All these different cases about what to do in those type of situations. So the key to the concept of discussing today is about dichli, which means rejected, which is the halacha that once a Korban is disqualified, it remains disqualified even when the reason is gone. So once it's rejected, it remains rejected, and different cases and variations of the halacha of dichli. And geisis is that when someone is in the throes of death, he has somewhat of a halachic status as a person that we know that is going to die. So we begin the current daf, Tzaddik Zayin V'Beis, 3 lines over the Yomim. We continue with the halacha of the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Hamafish Nikei L'Pesach. Someone separates a female for Korban Pesach, which again, the Korban Pesach has to be a male. Or a male animal, but it's 2 years old, where again it's not fit to be a Korban Pesach. So halacha is like this: year actually is time, so it grazes until it develops a blemish. Then you sell the animal. Then you use from its proceeds as a donation for a shlama. Because as Rashi explains, when you designate it, when you separate it for Korban Pesach, it established it. Now, although generally the halacha is it has to be viable to be rejected, and here from its inception it was rejected. But it's like something that was established to be rejected, where it itself is not sacrificed as shlomim, rather it's monetary value, which is somewhat of a chiddush, and it's Rashi is coming to address, and the Gemara will mention this idea too, that it can't be rejected. It never was eligible. No, the fact that you make it into a Korban Pesach, that's an automatic rejection, and it's like any Korban that was rejected. And the halacha is okay. Then you have to wait till there's a blemish, and then you use its proceeds for what would be the Meisra Pesach. When you have funds for Pesach, which you can't use for Pesach, use as a Shlomim, so it's going to be as a Korban Shlom. Continuing to Tzaddik Chesed and Aleph, says the Mishnah, Hamafresh Pischai Umeis. If someone separates a Korban Pesach, and he dies, and Gemara is going to explain when did this person die, but his son cannot bring it in place of his father as a Korban Pesach, because this is what's called a Pesach Shenei Subalav, the Pesach where the owner died. And now there's no one menuyim, there's no one listed on the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach has to be nim no love. It's not enough just to bring it. You weren't counted on it. This was your father's Korban Pesach. And therefore, if he died, he cannot bring it as a Korban Pesach, Elishem Shlamim. Rather, after Pesach, they will bring it as a Korban Shlam. Now, regarding the halacha, the ratio of the Mishnah, the Gemara says, Amar Rabhuna B'Rim Yeshu. It says, Shmami Noah, from the opening halacha that said that if you mafresh on the cable or a zachar ben shtei shonim for your Korban Pesach, which obviously not eligible, that the halacha is year, it's going to graze. So Shmamina we learn twice. We learn 3 halachas regarding the laws of rejection, because you tell me it's rejected as a Korban Pesach, and it's like has to graze and has to rubble blemish. It's like it was a status of a Pesach, but like rejected. So you learn Shmamina first of all the Balacham Nidachin, that living creatures could be rejected, meaning even when it's alive, it could be a total rejection, even if it's eligible for what it was originally eligible. It cannot be sacrificed; rather has to graze, because the Mishnah told us that. We know, of course, not going to be brought as a Korban Pesach, because it's not a Zachar and it's not Shalachas. But generally what you do with the leftovers of a Korban Pesach, or you can't bring it, you bring it as a Shlamim. Here, it itself is not going to be brought as a Shlamim. You said you have to let it graze, and then the funds are brought for a Shlamim. Why? The Shlamim, it was always eligible to be, a Shlamim could be Ben Shtei Shlamim, it could be in the Keva. So why are you not bringing it itself as a Shlamim? Because it's rejected. Because when you made it for the Korban Pesach, and it's not, so it's like you wanted it for a Pesach, which is not, and therefore even when it ultimately becomes eligible for the Meisra Pesach, which is Shlom, no, you was already rejected for the Pesach, and therefore you have to let it graze and bring only from its funds a Shlom, which, as Rashi points out, that's not like Rabbi Shimon, who we're actually going to quote later on the Gemara, that he says in Seftes Yom that Balacham in Nachin. It's not considered rejected when it's still alive. because he says we learn that from Balmum. An animal that has a blemish, so when it has a blemish, it's rejected. When the blemish is not there anymore, then it is eligible. So you see, when it's alive, you don't consider it rejected. So therefore, that's what our mission is obviously not like that halacha of Reb Shimon. And Rashi points out, we knew this already from the previous mission on Tzadik Vav Mabeis. This halacha, when it got lost, we kept on speaking about it. The animal's lost, and that's when it's alive, and we see that it's rejected. He says, Rashi, yeah, you're right. Just from here, we're learning out three things. We put all together in this mission. We already knew this from the previous mission that our Tana holds Bali Chaim Nidach, and even when it's alive, it can be rejected. And again, rejected means say it'll remain rejected, in contrast to like Reb Shimon, who says, no, when it's alive, it can't become rejected. If it becomes eligible again, like the blemish is removed, then it wouldn't be rejected. For Shemam, the second thing we learn is Deichu Me'ikara. In an initial rejection, Havadichui is also considered as rejection because a female or a male animal that's 2 years old, from its inception, it was never fit to be sanctified, and yet still you're saying that it has to graze and it cannot be sacrificed to Shalom itself, because there is a Manda Amr in the Sukkah of Ramah Gimel Beis that says the Dich is only what's called Nirav Nidcha. It was eligible, and then it's not. Okay, then once rejected, it's ice. But if it was never eligible in the first place, so it wasn't rejected, it wasn't eligible to be rejected. So how could you tell me this was rejected? It's a rejected Korban Pesach. Not rejected Korban Pesach, it was never Korban Pesach in the first place. No, we hold, this Mandam holds that even Dichu Me'ikara have a Dichu. And the third thing, B'Shema Minah, is that Yesh Dichu B'Dam, that there's rejection even regarding the monetary sanctity. Rashi says, we find this many times in the Gemara, it's specifically regarding a teaching of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan says many times in Shas, if you have an animal of two partners, so one of the partners sanctifies his half, and then he buys out the other partner, and so that was, he had half sanctified first. So that's what's called, it was sanctified, but it cannot be sacrificed. And the Gemara says, shmaminat plus. Like over here, Masechtas Kedushin, Masechtas Zvachim, and Rashi says he understood it from specifically Masechtas Krisis, where the gears of the Gemara there is like over here, where we say, shmaminat Kedushas Nadamim Nitcha. So what does that mean? It says, what you learn from that is that even something that initially its sanctification was not a physical sanctity, it was a monetary sanctity. Like when you're sanctifying half the animal, and half the animal remains chulin, obviously it's not a physical sanctity, you can't sanctify half of an animal, it's regarding your shears in that animal. And still we see it's considered rejected for its physical sanctity from its inception, and that it'll never be able to be sacrificed ever again, because once rejected, it remains rejected. And you don't say that no, rejection by kachim is only by a physical sanctity. That becomes rejected from being sacrificed. But a monetary sanctity, that's not strong enough to consider it as rejected, and that if it ever comes a time that you can then subsequently sacrifice it, when let's say this guy buys out the other guy and he sanctifies the other half, then yeah, you'll be able to sacrifice it. No, we say that there's even going to be rejection even by Kedushas Dam. Says Rashi, that's what the Gemara means over here too. When we're saying this Dichu B'Dam, for example, when you are Makdish and the Keva, you come Pesach, it's not fit for a Korban Pesach. There's no physical sanctity over here. The whole sanctification is for monetary sanctity. But yet, since it's rejected because it's not fit to sacrifice it in itself, we say it's always going to be forever rejected, even after Pesach. Where the Moisra Pesach is a shlamim, and a female animal is fit to be a shlamim, still our mission is telling us that it's considered rejected on the monetary level, and you can't even bring itself as the shlamim. So you see that Kedushas Damim is strong enough to make a halacha of rejection regarding it. And Rashi says, although we don't find out this halacha machlekes tonight, but still we learn out a bunch of things from here. We learn out Bali Chaim Nidachin, we learn out Dichin Nekar B'Dachin, and we learn out that there's Dichin even B'Dam, even by monetary sanctity. Then the Mishnah said the second halacha was a mafresh Pesachim B'Chulu. Someone separates a Korban Pesach and he dies. So he said that his son, B'Chulu, etc., his son cannot bring it as a Korban Pesach, rather someone bring it as a Shlom. Now, when the Brisa elaborates on this halacha, a little bit more specific. Hamafresh is Pesach L'meis. The same case. Someone separates a Korban Pesach and he dies. So here the Brisa differentiates exactly regarding what the case is. In B'nai Mamunima, if the father had his son listed with him on the Korban Pesach, so even when the father passed away, there's still Bailim that are Nimna, that are still listed on the Korban Pesach. Oh, then you get Pesach. Of course, then the son can bring as a Korban Pesach. He's one of the members of this Korban Pesach. In B'nai Mamunima, which this is obviously the case in the Mishnah, the son was not listed on his father's Korban Pesach, and now his father passed away, and there's a Korban Pesach without any owners on it. Then he should bring it as a Korban Shlamim, like our Mishnah said. L'shisha also on the 16th of Nisan. The Gemara points out Yud Vav In only on the 16th of Nisan, L'tez Vav Loi, not the 15th of Nisan, because Kasav, the time the Mishnah holds, Nedarim and Nedavas was what the Shlamim is. It's just a Nedava. So when you have a vowed carbon or a donated carbon, ain't created Yom Tov, that's not sacrifice on Yom Tov. So you can't bring it on the 15th. You would have to bring it on Chalamayit on the 6th. Fine. But now the Gemara says, the mis emas. when exactly did the father die? To understand the two cases, you told me if the son is listed on it, he brings it as a Pesach. The son's not listed on it, bring it as a Shlomo. When exactly did the father die? Because it's going to be impossible to understand both these cases if they're both talking about the same thing. If you think that the father passed away, this is a little bit connected from the previous daf, so again, it's a little bit halting cup also. If you think it's talking about that, the father died before Chatzais, so early in the morning on Erev Pesach, he passed away. Wait, so you told me if his son was listed with him, Pesach. So okay, let's see what he can bring as a Korban Pesach. The problem is, but the halacha of aninis, which is when someone's relative dies that day and they weren't buried yet, takes effect on him from before Chatzais. So the obligation of bringing a Korban Pesach is not going to take effect on the Einin. Why not? Because we learned in the Mishnah previously of Tzadi Alf Menaf that said, V'chulan, all these people, which we spoke about a guy that was digging out people, rescue, and one of the cases was an Einin. He said we don't slaughter the Korban Pesach just for them, because maybe they're not going to be kosher. Maybe the Einin is going to be betam himself to his relative, and his tummy is not going to be eligible. Our Mishnah is saying over here Yiviyenu, the Bryce is saying Yiviyenu, which sounds like he could bring it by himself. But if his father died before Chatzais, then such a person is going to be Einin when this man Achiv starts. So we said Einin, we don't bring it just for that Einin. So this son should not be bringing the Korban Pesach. What? If they'll be kaiver him.
Somebody else was matapel.
Yeah, I guess that would be the case. If they had done that.
The whole day?
No, yes, I'm saying, but he would talk about that. If they would have, if the Rashi addresses a similar type of question, if it was a few days ago, he says no, they don't usually do a few days ago. So if he's I guess it sounds like that they didn't bury him, that he's an Einin, and therefore when Chatzais comes around, that when the Chiv starts, at that point they shouldn't be bringing the Korban Pesach for him.
That would be a hechetim.
Yeah. So Ella rather says the Gemara, the Misacha Chatzais, we're talking about where he died after Chatzais. So since the obligation of Pesach came first, okay, then he can slowly come Pesach for himself. But we're not concerned that he's going to make it puzzle, because he's going to be careful because of the obligation of Pesach, which already took effect on him from beforehand. Because Rashi says, if the Aninis took effect first, then we're concerned he's not going to be careful. I mean, he will make himself tummy, and that'll be problematic. And why can't you just say that, which is similar to your question, Rashi says that, why can't you say that his father died a day or two before Pesach? So another Akimta, like, in other words, so he's not an Einin. His father died a few days ago, and the father died, he had to come Pesach separated, and that could be the case of where the son could bring the Korban Pesach. So it says Rashi, no, generally, that day they would be mafresh that Pesach. It'd be like right before, a guy bolts the Beis Hamikdash, let's take from the sheep over here. So it's not Mistabel a few days ago, it's right now, it's happening right now. So when did it happen? Before Chatzais, after Chatzais? So the problem is, if you tell me that it happened after Chatzais, so okay, I could understand then the halacha of the Korban Pesach. I understand why then you could bring it for him. Because if it's before Chatzais, then you can't, because you're Einin, you're not going to be careful. After Chatzais, you already had the Chiv, and then the father died at 1 o'clock, at 2 o'clock, you'll be careful, because you already know you have a Chiv of Korban Pesach. It's more like a psychological thing. I mean, if you already have the Chiv already, you'll be careful. If Yaninis was before Chatzais, then you were an Einin before, and you might not be so careful. But the problem is, then what do you do with the second half of the halacha? You told me then, the son is not listed on the Korban Pesach. The problem is, if you tell me the case you're talking about, that the father died after Chatzais, hakavate Chatzais. That means to say the father already had his mafresh his Korban Pesach at 10 o'clock in that morning. They quickly took him in for a cardiac arrest. He died after Chatzais. That means to say at Chatzais, it was already established that it was able to be his Korban Pesach. And when you don't ultimately bring it, it's going to be rejected. It's rejected from being a shlam, because the Mishnah taught on Tzadik Vavim base, if you have a Pesach that's Dirat Chatzais and you don't sacrifice it, you're actually is time, because it was able to, because at Zman Chatzais, it was around, and you're not going to end up using it because the father dead. That's rejected, so you can't bring it itself as a shlam. You would have to have Yirat Sheistad. So therefore, the Gemara says, I don't understand what the case is. If it's before Chatzais, then I don't understand the case of the Reisha. If it's after Chatzais, I don't understand the case of the Sefer, which is when the son is listed or not listed on. When you're saying you bring out Pesach or Shlamim, it doesn't fit both cases. of the Pesach and the Shlamim regarding if it's before or after Chatzos. So the Gemara actually has 5 different interpretations for this question. Amar Rabba, or it's Rabba, says Lo'ilam de Miskred Chatzos. Truthfully, it's talking about where the father died before Chatzos. So then the question is, Umay Bien L'Shem Pesach. So I understand the Sefer, I understand why it's going to be brought to the Shlam, because it was never there at Chatzos with the father alive, so it's not rejected. So, but what is it that you're saying in the ratio you can bring as a Pesach if the son is listed? And the problem is, but he's a Einin before Chatzos, and you told me that when someone's a Einin, he's not going to be careful, and you don't bring it just for the Einin. Says the Gemara, L'Shum Pesach Sheni. When we're saying he'll bring it as a Pesach, it means that if he didn't end up bringing Pesach Rishon because he was an Einin the whole day, he was not able to bring it, so then he'll bring it for Pesach Sheni, because it's his. He's listed on it. He just couldn't bring it because it was an Einin. That's what we say. We don't say he'll bring it as Pesach Rishon, because right, an Einin doesn't bring it. Abai Yomi says the second interpretation. He says the more complicated answer. He says, let's start with the L'stad means to say that it's for different options. The 2 cases are actually independent, as follows. Meis achar chatzos, if the father died after noon, which then the obligation of Pesach already took effect beforehand, before the father passed away, because at chatzos the father was still alive. So then, benoi memuni imay, if the son was counted with him on the Korban Pesach with his chabura, and therefore even when the father passed away, there's still bailam on the Korban Pesach. Oh, then you begin with Shem Pesach. Then you should bring it as a Korban Pesach. And that's one case. And as Rashi explains, regarding if the son is not listed on that Korban Pesach, in that case, the Brisa wasn't talking about when the father dies after Chatzos. From our Mishnah, we could understand that yes, the halach would be that Yireh, it would have to graze. Because since the father was alive at Chatzos, and now there's no owners, so it was Nitche, it's going to be rejected. Yes, that would be the case. Now, but then there's a different case. It goes to a different case. It goes Meis Kodim Chatzos. There's 2 different cases here in the Brisa. Then there's Meis Kodim Chatzos. If the father died before Chatzos, then Ein B'nai Memunimah. If the son is not listed with them, then you begin L'Shum Shlamim. Then you bring it as a Shlamim, because it wasn't established at Chatzos, because the father was already dead before Chatzos. Now, regarding if the son was listed on him in that case, so that also is not mentioned, but that we didn't have to tell you anything, because then most definitely he's going to sacrifice it for Pesach Sheni, because we know he's the Ein already, and we don't bring it for an Ein, but for the Atzma. So we learn from both the Reisha and the Sefer essentially, that where the obligation of Pesach took effect first, which is the father died after Chatzos, that then you would check from him. But if the father died before Chatzos, then you're not going to. So that's Abai's interesting answer. He says, let's study, it's actually 2 different cases. One is Meis Lefnei Chatzos, one's Meis Achar Chatzos. Third answer, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg says, Lo'ilam de Meis Achar Chatzos. Truthfully, it's talking about where the father died after noon. But then the question was, then how do you understand the Sefer? Why is it being sacrificed as Shlamim if the son's not listed with him? But it's established at Chatzos as the ability to become Pesach, and it's rejected because the son is not listed on it. So why is it brought as a Shlamim? It should be rejected. So he says, talking about the father was on the throes of death by Chatzos. So therefore, if the son was listed on the Korban Pesach with him, so the son can bring us a Korban Pesach, because the obligation of Pesach took effect first, because the father wasn't dead yet at Chatzos. So the Chiv Pesach for him, for the son, came before his Aminas. Then we said he's careful, he's not going to become Metamid Lameis. But if the son is not listed with him, we say he's going to bring it as a Shlamim. Why? Isn't it rejected? Because the Chatzos, the father was still alive? Yes, but because since at Chatzos the father was a Geisis, and what the Gemara tells us elsewhere, Roiv Geis and Lamisa, most people in the throes of death die, so Chatzos is not going to establish it, because he's basically dead. So it's not like he was able for him to bring it, and therefore it's not considered rejected, and therefore the son can still bring it itself as a Shlam. Sounds like a Chiddush of a Lumdis to say that L'maisa, if he's listed, he can bring his Korban Pesach, but if he's not, then the father's Korban is not being rejected, because it's a Geisis. It wasn't never near of a Nitche. It wasn't rejected. The father wasn't able to bring it. The laws of majority was telling us that he was going to die. Vashim, he says a 4th interpretation. It says Lo'im de Misla Achar Chatzos. Says again, like the previous answer, the father died after Chatzos, and then the question is, okay, so then how could you bring it as a Shlamim if the son's not listed in it? But I mean, the father was around at Chatzos, and it should be rejected. Because Reb Shimoni, the Amar, we had mentioned Reb Shimoni before in the Gemara. It's Rabbi Shloimy who says Masechtas Yoma Daf Samach Gimel Mabei, Ein Balachayim Lidach, and he holds a living creature is never considered rejected, only if it has a blemish, or if it's an esnan from a zaino or a mechir of a kelev, where that's totally rejected. So then it's going to be rejected. But whatever it's fit for, it could be sacrificed. And here, this is fit for a shlamim, so it itself will be brought as a shlamim, and it won't be considered you have to be yira v'yitzchak. It doesn't have to be grazed and developed blemish, because it's a living creature. A living creature is not rejected. It's only something that you already slaughtered. Those types of things should be rejected. Rabbi Nama, he said the fifth interpretation, he says, we're talking about where the father actually had separated the carbon after chatzais. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he designated his carbon Pesach. And then the father passed away a half hour later, and it was all afternoon. Now, if the son was listed with the father, so of course he can bring his carbon Pesach, because the obligation of Pesach took effect first, because at chatzais, the father was still alive, and the son was not a nine. If the son's not listed with the father on the carbon Pesach, the Bryce was saying he's going to bring it as a shlamim, because since at chatzais it was not even separated yet, so it couldn't have been kava lidachais, because it wasn't around them. Because Savar and the Tana of this Bryce holds chatzais kava, that midday is what establishes it, not the time of when you actually do the slaughtering of all the other karbanas, and therefore you'll bring it as a shlam because it was never rejected. Because the father only separated afternoon, so it can't be rejected. Rejected is only at the time when it starts. The obligation, that's the fifth interpretation of the Brisa to explain the halacha, if nimna love or leinim love, which that was the case of a Mishnah. Mishnah didn't specify exactly the parameters. The Brisa was more specific. If the son is listed, he brings a Pesach, he's not just bringing a Shlam, and that's what the Gemara is trying to figure out. But that doesn't seem to be correct, because one would make sense, Kaim Chatzais, one makes sense, Lachar Chatzais, which that was one of the five answers. So yeah, one is told about Kaim, one is told about Lachar. But then the other answers try to resolve it, even in the same case, regarding how could you have both of these halachas to be correct. Now now look at the next Mishnah, which continues on the different deviations of invalidations of a carbon Pesach. So it says the Mishnah, Pesach shenisar b'zvachim. If you have a carbon Pesach there, it got mixed up with other carbonas. So let's say you have 3 lambs. You have one that's a Pesach, one that's an Asham, and one that's an Oila. And the Pesach is mixed up in these carbonas. So Allah is kul and yirat shistav. Okay, now we don't know which is which. You all have to graze until develop a blemish. And then you sell them all. The other b'dmeha and yafish behen the minzeh. So you take the most fatty one, the best one of them all. You take it and you use its funds for an Oila, because maybe the Oila was the best one. Also, too, you also take from the value, the monetary income of the best one, you buy an asham. Maybe the asham was the best one. And then you take also from the value of the best animal, a carbon Pesach. Now, it depends. If it's before Pesach, that you let it graze and you develop a blemish. If it was after Pesach, then you let it graze and then you bring it as a shlamim, because, again, maybe the best one was a Pesach. And the yafsid ha'maitzmi beisai. That excess, that now obviously now, let's say you had 3 lambs, one was worth 200, one was worth 150, one was 100. So you tell me for each carbon now you're going to spend $200, because maybe it was the one that was $200. Now that extra money that's coming out of pocket has to be his own loss from his own monies, because it can't be the loss of kachim. Now, and if you're going to say, says Rashi, wait a second, how's he doing this? He might be bringing the shlamim from the funds he's getting from the asham or from the oila. But the problem is, a sanctity of the animal takes effect on its monies itself, and you can't switch it from kedusha kedusha. When you sold the most expensive animal, let's say it was $200, you're going to now spend it on the oila. How can you do that? Says Rashi, no. When you're coming to deconsecrate the animals, what you do is you bring the value of the most expensive one, let's say a sella. So you bring, if the most expensive one was a sella, and the other one was a half a sella, a quarter sella, you bring 3 slam from your house, and you take 1 sella, and you say, wherever is the oila, it's deconsecrated on this sella, and you bring an oila. And then you take a second cell. He says, wherever the ashram is, it's easy content on this cell. And you bring an ashram until the shlam. So it's not really these, as if you're taking the funds of the ashram and using it for the oila. You do is you deconsecrate it onto these funds. So then it's mechol wherever it is, and then you're just using the most expensive currency.
But you have to wait until all 3 of them become balamuni.
Yeah.
Because you cannot do it with 1 or 2.
Right. So saying that's right. You have to let them all graze and develop a blemish, and then you do this procedure of taking the most expensive one and then buying a new one. Now, this is if it gets mixed in, let's say, Oila or Asham. But what's the halacha if, let's say, in this Arab B'Bechayris, let's say Carbon Pesach gets mixed up with firstborn animals, where the matan damim, the blood that's thrown on the mizbeach of the B'Chayris and Carbon Pesach are the same. Actually, you learn out Pesach from B'Chayr. And they both don't need Tnuvas Chazav V'Shaik, they don't need Smicha, you don't need Nesachim. So here B'Shem Menayim, he says, in Chabur's Kahanim, so therefore, if this is a Chabur of Kahanim, who anyways eat b'chayris, it's one of the matnas kuhuna, yoichlu, so that what they do is, they'll eat all those animals the Seder night, and they'll make it, if it's Pesach, as a Pesach, and B'chayris, they'll eat it as a B'chayr. So, Mamanim Shach, it's okay. It has the same Avodah anyway. So you'll eat it to say the night. If it's a Pesach, it's a Pesach. If it's a B'chayr, it's a B'chayr. That's obviously only if they're Chabur of Kam. If they're Yisrael, they don't have the rights in those firstborn animals. But the Gemara asks on Amud Beis, it's asking on Rabbi Shimon, who says we're going to Pesach of Nesar B'chayris, but V'okamaisi Kachim Beis Absul. The problem is, you're bringing kachim to the place of where it has to be invalidated and being burned because you're diminishing the amount of time you could eat the meat, and you're going to burn it the next morning inappropriately because you're not sure that it's a Korban Pesach. You should have said that let it graze, because the halach is that a b'chor could be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Now you're limiting the amount of time. Who could eat? Like you already had that steak, and they bring out the next steak. You're like, oh, gosh, give me a doggy bag. I'll take it home. Right? But here, the next morning, that's it. We're burning it all. We're throwing it out. What do you mean throwing it out? This is a good kachim. This might be a b'chor. How can you do that? Says Gemara, Rabbi Shimon goes according to his reason. That he says elsewhere, Levin kachim based up, so you could bring kachim to diminish the amount of time you could eat them, because he says it's better to have it as a regular carbon, even though you can diminish the amount of time you could eat it, than having the halacha b'riyah of having a graze and develop a blemish. It's not like the Mishnah said this vacha. Mishnah says, Asham sh'nesar b'shlam. If the asham gets mixed up with a shlamim, so Reb Shimon he says, Yishchatu b'tzafa. What you do is you slaughter the carbon in the north of the Azara, which is like the strings of an asham, which kachim have to be slaughtered in the north of the Azara, and not like shlam, which you be slaughtered anywhere, because we don't know which one it is. And you'll eat it the stringencies of like an asham, where it could only be eaten for the male kahanim, it can be eaten only for a day and a night, has to be eaten within the curtains of the Azara, which Amalei, the sage said to Reb Shimon, you can't bring karbanas to be invalid, where you diminish the amount of time you could eat a shlamim. Shlamim can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night, he only eating it for a day and a night. Rather, they hold they should graze invaluable blemish. So therefore, Reb Shimon, Lashitase, in our Mishnah, is saying, yeah, you could bring it, lebeis absul, you could diminish the amount of time you could eat it. It says, okay, then Rabbanan. So the Mishnah only told us if you have the b'chor sh'nesar b'pesach, what to do according to Reb Shimon. But according to Rabbanan, that they say you cannot bring kachim lebeis absul. What do you do for the pesach to get mixed up with b'chayris? Because Rashi explains it's a very specific question. I understand in the Reish of the Mishnah, when he had an asham that got mixed up with, let's say, a shlamim, or like here in this Mishnah in Zvachim. So the halach is going to be that you could say that, okay, graze and sell it, and bring from the proceeds karbanas, like we said in the Mishnah. The problem is, by B'chayr it says, loy tifta, you cannot redeem a firstborn animal. The monies do not take effect to deconsecrate the B'chayr. So it never leaves its sanctity to take effect on monies. It has to be eaten in a blemished state by the kohen. The problem is, a Pesach could be redeemed, and not only that, it cannot be eaten without being redeemed. So you're between the rock and the hard place. When you have the Pesach being mixed up with B'chayris, what do? You can't sell them all, and when they develop a blemish, because the B'chayr cannot be sold, it cannot be redeemed. So it's always you retain the sanctity of the B'chayr. And the Korban Pesach, on the other hand, if it's not a Pesach, if you want to use it in not as a Pesach, you have to deconsecrate it. So what are you going to do with it? So my rabbi says, what you do is like this. You wait till it develops blemishes. Then the other behemoth shmeina, you bring the fattiest one, like the best one of the ones that got mixed up. You bring that animal, but then you say like this, which we don't know which one's the Pesach, which one's the B'chayr. Wherever the Pesach is, let its sanctity take effect, allow the hide on these monies. And with those monies you buy a shlamim, like the law of Meiser Pesach, which is the leftover funds of a Korban Pesach. And then you eat the whole mixture, b'tayres b'chayr b'amon, in the laws of a blemished firstborn animal. What's that law? So you can't sell it in the marketplace, you can't slaughter in the marketplace, you can't weigh it with weights, and if you recognize which was the Korban Pesach and you redeemed it, so you could slaughter and you could sell it and you could do that all in the marketplace as you want to. But since you don't know, now there's one Korban Pesach over here. So you say whichever is the Korban Pesach, it's deconsecrated on these monies, and then you buy a shlamim. And now together with all the other ones, you'll eat them all in this, because now you're eating all the animals, whichever was the Korban Pesach was redeemed already, and eat them in the state of, you have to wait till it develops a blemish, and then the Karnim are going to eat it in the blemished state. Because there's nothing else you could do. You can't eat it by the Seder night. You can't just do whatever you want. You have to wait till it develops a blemish because of the halacha of the Korban Pesach that's different than that of the B'chayr. Look at the next Mishnah, also regarding deviations in the Korban Pesach. Says the Mishnah, Chabur Shavit Pesach. If you have a group of people that lost their Korban Pesach, they said to one of the guys, says, okay, say you bakish, go out and look for the lost one. And find the lost one and go bring it and slaughter for us for the Korban Pesach. So that guy, he He finds the Korban Pesach and he slaughters it. But the problem is, Behem lo achlu l'shachtu. They say, you know what, who knows what's going to be with this guy? They also bought a Korban Pesach and they slaughtered it. So here's a bunch of different cases. It's all the same idea basically, but there's many different cases. It's one theme. If his was slaughtered first, so as Rashi explains, since they told him, slaughter it for us, so they really counted on his Korban Pesach. So they cannot be counted on their own Korban Pesach, because you're already on his Korban Pesach and he's bringing it first. So he eats from theirs, he eats from his, they eat with him from his, and theirs is burnt, because that was a Pesach without Bailim, because they were listed on his. It can be listed on two, so they're all going to eat from his. Now, let's say they brought theirs first, so they eat from their own, because they already removed themselves from his by bringing theirs first. He eats from his own, because he wasn't counted on theirs. They eat from their own because they obviously retracted from the lost one, and they were Moshe Chideim, because they obviously were Moshe, because they brought their own Korban Pesach first. But he eats from his own, meaning the one that was lost. Now, the man you do Ezim in this tradition. Let's say you don't know which one was slaughtered first. Let's say they're both slaughtered at the same time. So he eats from his own because he obviously he was getting the original one, he found the lost one. But them, they don't eat with him. Why? Because maybe theirs was slaughtered first, and then they were obviously withdrawn from his. But their own goes out to be burnt because maybe his was slaughtered first, and therefore they were not listed on the second one because they actually were listed with him. But if it Pesach Sheni, they're exempt from being Pesach Sheni because Manavshach. They were listed on some carbon by the first Pesach. We just don't know which one. So the fact that they can't eat from it, that's not ma'akir. But they were obviously on one of the carbons, either his or theirs. Now, let's say another case. Let's say Amalehen. Now we go the other way around. Let's say he tells them, the individual who's going to look for it, everyone's sitting back and getting ready for the Pesach, and he's going out looking for the Korban Pesach. He tells to the rest of the guys, look, if I'm late, I'm going to look for it. But if I'm delayed, we got to bring the Korban Pesach. I don't know if I'm going to find it. You guys go out and bring the Korban Pesach for me and let me be listed on that. Now, they didn't tell him, okay, you slaughter for us. Because they were like, okay, look, we don't hear back from you, we're just going to bring your own. Let's say he goes, he finds it and he slaughters it. Now, they didn't know, they didn't hear back from him. They also bought and they slaughtered it. So here, if theirs was slaughtered first, they obviously eat from their own, because they didn't tell him anything about being listed on his. And he also eats with them, and his is going to be burnt, because since he was listed on theirs, so obviously he would withdrawn from his own, and he retracted from his own shlichus, because he told them to have him in mind, and they slaughtered them theirs first. Now, let's say his was slaughtered first. Then he eats from his own. And he eat from their own because they weren't listed with him. The main you do is in this tradition. Let's you don't know which one was slaughtered first. Which will be slaughtered at the same time. They eat from their own because they didn't tell him anything about being listed on his. But he doesn't eat with them. And his goes out to be burnt because maybe theirs was slaughtered first, and therefore he was withdrawn from his own, and he was listed with them, and because he made them the shliach for him, but we don't know, so therefore his has to be burnt. Now he's exempt from being in the second Pesach because again the Manavshach, he was listed on one of them. He's his or theirs. You just can't eat it because you don't know which one he was on, but he's exempt from being Pesach Sheni. Now another case. Let's say Amalehen. Let's say he said to them, slaughter the Korban Pesach for me if I'm delayed. And they said to him also, look for it and slaughter for us. So either one, you do for us, we do for you. So, okay, they'll all eat from the first one that was brought because they're his agent and he's their agent. So, Manashach, they said whoever's going to be so to speak first, will be listed on I'm for you and you're for me. So whichever one was slaughtered first, that's the one they're on. Now, the main you do is Mendish Chavishin. Let's say you don't know which one was slaughtered first. So, Shnei Yisrael Beis HaSeifim. So then both of them have to be burnt. And they're all exempt from being a Pesach Sheni, because the reason why they have to both be burnt, because you don't know which one you were listed on, which one was the real Korban Pesach. But you're exempt because Manavshach, either one was the one. So you'll be exempt from the Pesach Sheni. Let's say a fourth case. Let's say Let's say that he didn't tell them anything and they didn't tell him anything. He said, I'm looking for this, I'm gonna find this one. And somebody didn't tell him, if you guys get to be listed. And they didn't tell him either when you find it to be listed on. So then, they're not responsible one for the other. In other words, there's no claim one or the other. We're not concerned which one is slaughtered first. They eat from theirs and he eats from his. That was one type of halacha in the Mishnah. Then says the Mishnah a different case. Shtei chaburos. If let's say you have two groups, shenisar Pesachim, that their Korban Pesach got mixed up together. So what you do is like this, and now you don't know whose is which animal. So these guys draw from one of the Pesachs to them. These guys draw one of the Korban Pesach. I mean, there's two animals, and the two chaburas were near each other, and the animals got mixed up. Say, oh, which one was ours? I don't know. So now you don't know who's have to be nidnalav. So what you do is random. They take one of the sheep and they take one of the sheep. Now, what you do now is like this. Echad mi'elu, one of the people of this chabura, baloi etzel elu, goes to the other chabura. The echad mi'elu baloi etzel elu. Now, one of the people from that chabura comes to this chabura. But this is what they say to the individual that now from the other chabura that came to them, like this. Im shalanu hu Pesach hazeh. If this Pesach, which we randomly chose, we selected very well because it's really our Pesach, then yedecha meshuchas mishalcha. Your Korban Pesach is withdrawn from your Korban Pesach, and v'nim nisal shalanu, and you're listed on ours. Now, v'im shalcha Pesach. If it really turns out that it's really from your group, and we made a mistake, it's not really ours. So yedeina meshuchas mishalanu, then our hands are withdrawn from ours. V'nim shalcha, and we're listed on yours. So it comes that if they had mixed it up, so then each group is going to have someone else that they could tell him that we're going to be on your group. Now, obviously, you have to have one person from each group to come to the other one to be listed with them. Why can't you just say that we're withdrawing from our group, wherever it is, and either way, if it's ours, it's ours. If it's not, we're withdrawn. You can't do that because the Gemara tells in the Brisa that both according to Rabbi Yehuda and according to Rabbi Yisrael, meaning just make it new again, meaning just start over, do a reset button. Okay, we don't know whose is which. This is ours now. Why can't you do that? Because the Gemara tells according to Rabbi Yisrael, it's forbidden for the Bnei Chabur to be totally withdrawn. You can never have at one moment to totally withdraw and that there's no biome on this carbon. Now, so when you have one of the Bnei Chabur that comes to the other one, then Manav Shach, you don't have a Pesach B'lei Bailam. If they selected well, so really the whole Chabur, besides this one guy, is the original Chabur. And if they really mixed it up, so then the new guy that came to them, he's that one guy of the Bnei Chabur. So you're never going to have a moment that you don't have one of the Bnei Chabur on that. It says the Mishnah B'chein, in other cases, Chamish Chabur Shel Chamish Chamisha. Same thing applies if you have 5 groups of 5 apiece, or B'shel Asar Asar, or you have 10 of 10 apiece, which these are groups that their Korban Pesach got mixed up. So you do a similar thing. What you do is, every single group takes one of the Pesachim. And you have 5 people in every single group that are split up for the 5 Pesachim. So if by mistake you took the wrong one, you're not going to have a Pesach that's not going to have one of the original owners on it. And remember, that's what they say. When they make these new groups now, so the 4 say to the one, if this was your Pesach, so then the 4 of us are withdrawn from our 4 Pesachim, wherever it is, we'll listen with you. And so what they say to the second guy, and the third guy, and the fourth guy, every single guy, you go around the perimeter, and you tell everyone, because it's going to be one of them that's going to have from the original carbon. Now, another case is the Mishnah. Let's say Shnaim Shenasam Pesach. Let's say you have 2 people that their Pesach get mixed up. You have Reuven and Shimon, and their Korban Pesach get mixed up. So with the halacha is like this. Them moishech lo yechad. So okay, this guy randomly chooses one carbon, but them moishech lo yechad, this randomly chooses the other. Now what you have to do now is like this. Zem mana ima yechad min hashuk. Reuven goes, and he gets Levi from the street, and he says, look, wherever my Pesach is, you're listed with me. V'zem mana ima yechad min hashuk. And Shimon takes Yehuda from the street, and he says, whatever mine is, you're listed with me. Now we have 2 on each one, wherever it is. We don't know where it is. Now what you do is the next step is Zebo Eitzel Zeh. Reuven goes to the Pesach that Shimon chose, V'Zebo Eitzel Zeh. And Shimon goes to the Pesach that Reuven chose, and that's what now Reuven says to Yehuda, who's remaining on the Pesach that Shimon selected. Im Shalihu Pesach Zeh. If that really the one that you're by is really mine. We didn't select well when we randomly chose. And this is not really the Pesach that Shimon added you to, it's really mine. Then Yedecha Meshuchas Meshalcha, so then your hands are withdrawn from yours. Then you're listed with me on this cover, which is really mine. Vim Shalcho Pesach Zeh, but if let's say, actually, that we did do a good random selection, that the one that you were originally listed on with Shimon is really Shimon's. oh, and it's really your Korban Pesach, then Yodi Meshachas Mishali, then my hand withdraws from mine, V'nim Tzal Shalcha, and it's listed with you. And that's why you needed that each one should go ahead and add on another person on the street, because if they would try to do this stipulation when they're individuals to say, look, if this was my Korban Pesach and yours is yours, then we selected well. And if not, then I'm withdrawing from mine, I'm being listed on yours, it's going to come out that when he's withdrawing from his own, then he's leaving the Korban Pesach as it is, in other words, without Bailam, because the other guy didn't yet do his on his. And even according to Rabbi Yasi, he holds that you can't do that, as we'll quote that in the Gemara, and says Rashi, you can't say that each one should, first list yourself on the other guy, and then withdraw yourself. You can't do that, because you can't be Nimna Shnei Pesachim Ke'echad, because that's not considered Menuyin, so therefore, the only way to do it is add another guy from the street. Now you got two guys, now you won't have a moment that it won't be listed with another person. Now, trying to bottle in the Brisa, regarding the cases of our Mishnah, two of the cases, a Musa Haskell. The Brisa says, like the halach of the Mishnah, the Amalahen, let's say he said to them, okay, you guys, if I don't make it back, I want to be listed on yours. And they said to him, look, if you find that we want to be listed with you, the halacha was Eichel Men Arishon. They said, okay, whichever one's the first one, that's the one they were listed on, they could even the first one. Let's say he didn't tell them anything, and they didn't tell him anything. And we said in the Mishnah, so they're not responsible one for the other. No matter which one's the one that's brought first, then they each all eat from the independent ones, because they're independent. He's going to get the one that he finds, and they're making their own compass because they didn't tell each other to be responsible. Says the Gemara, the Getin of Tzadik Tesam and Aleph, Mekanim HaChacham, maybe the sage said, because of this halacha, Yafresh Tika L'Chachamim, silence is appropriate for wise people. Because if he says, and they say, then the second korban has no takana. The first one is they're going to eat one, the second one's going to be burnt. If they don't say anything and he doesn't say anything, then both are fit, and both are going to be brought as valid Korban Pesachs. So you see that it's better to be silent and not to say anything. For sure, for foolish people, it's smart to be silent. Shneimah says the pasuk initially, Evel, a fool, if Macher should be silent, Chacham Yichashiv, they think he's smart. Better be quiet if you're even smart, for sure, if you're a fool. So I'm going to discuss in today's Daf Pesachim Daf Sadi Ches was the halach of the Mishnah that said Hamafresh nekeva lepischai, if you do it on a keva or it's a zachar ben shtei shanim, which is obviously not valid as a Korban Pesach, the halach is going to be grazed. And the Gemara says we learn out three things from here. First of all, that a living creature, it's still alive, it can still be rejected, not like Rabbi Shimon. Second of all, is that dicha meikar, even though from inception is rejected, it's considered rejected, that there's dicha even by damim, even by monetary sanctity. Next case in the Mishnah was if someone designates a Korban Pesach and he dies. So the Bryce elaborated and said, if his son is listed with him, okay, he'll bring as a Korban Pesach. If not, he'll bring as a Korban Shlamim, which the Bryce said on the 16th, and he said, because the Davis cannot be born on Pesach itself. So, but the Gemara had a question. He says, wait a second, when exactly did he die? If he died before Chatzais, then why is he being born as a Korban Pesach? But he's an Einin originally from the beginning. And Einin, we said in the previous mission, we don't bring a Korban Pesach for an Einin. So even if he was Nimnim, why would you bring as a Korban Pesach? Now, if the father died after Chatzais, I don't understand the second half of the halacha. Why you bring as a shlam? And that means to say at the time of Chatzais, when it's Kaiveya, the father is still alive. Father is still alive, then it's rejected when you don't bring it. So you should be Yira Achistam. Why you bring it as a shlamim? So they might have 5 approaches. Approach number 1 was the father died before Pesach. Then the question was, the father died before Pesach, so why if the son is listed, is he going to bring it to Korban Pesach? It's an Einin. You don't bring for an Einin. No, we mean it's a Pesach from by Pesach Sheni. If as an Einin he didn't bring the Pesach, he'll bring it as Pesach Sheni. But it was his Korban Pesach, his Nimnim, so he'll bring it as for Pesach Sheni. The second answer was let's start Niknani. You're right, it's actually 2 different cases. If the father dies after Chatzais and the son is listed with him, bring it as Korban Pesach, because the Chiv of Pesach was Chal first. Therefore, we said in that case you would bring it for an Einin, because since the Chiv was first, he'll be careful, he won't become Tamei. Then the other half of the Brisa was the second case. If he died before Chatzais and the son is not listed with him over there, then you bring it as a Shlamim, because it was not Kaveya, because it was from before Chatzais. The father was already dead by Chatzais. And Rashi explains, and what would be the other cases? Well, that we know. If it would be Yira or what the halach would be. Third interpretation was that no, the father died after Chatzais. Then the question was, the father died after Chatzais. So then I understand the case of Pesach that you bring as him for Pesach. It was Nimnam, but why would you bring it as a Shlamim? It was rejected. As I said, the father was still alive. No, the father was a Geisis, so it's not considered rejected. We didn't think he was going to bring it to Korban Pesach. Fourth interpretation was going like Rabbi Shimon, who holds Ein Balachayim Nidachin. So you're not going to say you're actually Stab. You're going to bring it as a Shlamim because it wasn't rejected, even though quote unquote it's being rejected, and a living creature is not rejected. Fourth interpretation was, we're talking about the father designated after Chatzais. It was only Mafresh Chatzais. And then the father died after Chatzais, and Chatzais Keveya. So it can't be rejected because it was only separated after Chatzais, and that's what's being brought as Shlom itself. Next Mishnah said regarding the Korban Pesach, it mixed with other Korbanos. We said the organ that graze, and you bring for the best one for all of them, because you don't know which is which. It gets mixed with B'chayres. According to Shimon, if it's like a bird of they can eat it, because as the Gemara explains, he holds that you bring Kachim based on soul, because although you won't be able to eat it for that night, doesn't make a difference. Just like an Asham, they can mix with a Shlamim. Now, according to Rabbana, what do? They don't hold that you could do that because you can't bring Labez Amsul, but you're stuck because the Bechar cannot be redeemed, and Pesach has to be redeemed. So you say what you do is you wait till it will develop a blemish. From the fattest one, you'll deconsecrate, because we don't know if that's the Pesach, the best one, because that's the one Pesach that mixed up, you'll deconsecrate that onto Mondays. Those Mondays you buy a Meiser Pesach, which is a Shlamim, and then you'll eat that Shlamim together with those Bachar Balimum all together at the same time, and then you'll be able to have it to be eaten because there's no other way to, according to the Rabban. Then we went to the Halach, the next Mishnah, which had many different cases, but we had a Chabur that lost his Pesach, and they said to him, go find it for us, and it depends if they said to him, he said to them, they both said to each other, neither one said to each other. But like the Gemara had said, that the Amira brings the case of Suffolk, because you don't know who's first, and therefore, that's going to be the Halachas, again, whichever one is first, and second, if you don't know, if it's going to get burnt, and so on and so forth. Then we spoke about two Chaburas, that their Karbanos get mixed up. So we said that what you have to do is one of the people from this chabur has to go to the other chabur, and so to five chaburs, to 5 people. Again, it's got to be that one of the members have to be there because you can't leave it for a moment without the members. And so to regarding two people that the Pesach get mixed up, we said that what you do is that you get another guy from the street, and then you switch, and then you say if mine is mine, if yours is yours, and then that's how they go ahead and do the Korban Pesach. Anytime.